Welcome to the J3U University podcast. I'm your host, John Jewett.
And I'm your co-host, Luke Miller.
Our mission is to elevate the physique coaching standard
and deliver the highest level of competitors to the stage.
Let's jump into today's episode. Machines versus free weights, which is better for building mass? And I see a lot of people that are coming out of preps or whatever it may be, and we're back to the basics. Let's get back to barbell squats and deadlifts and bent over rows. No more of complicating machines. But is there a place for machines and free weights, and how should you maybe be scaling these up as you get more advanced? So we're going to dive into which is actually better for mass.
Yeah, and it's an interesting dichotomy. Like, people want to pit one versus the other, like one of them doesn't have any role in programming, right? Like, one of them is the only way to train and the other one's not the only way to train, or not to be included in training. And it gets kind of interesting because, like, they stand on this staunch stance, and then you see their training start to progress and change over time when they run into problems. And I think that's kind of where the discussion begins, is like, not all global basic patterns are going to fit the way that everybody moves, or it's going to potentially lead to injury profiles for everyone. And I think that that's kind of where, when we start to look at picking exercises, the place to start is like, what is someone capable of? And then we can start to look at like some of the benefits and detractions. And I think what someone is capable of kind of brings us to like what the first potential issue and or benefit, depending on where someone is a lot of the basics require a high level of internal stability and managing a lot of load with that internal stability, which has a lot of benefits of potential transfer, but could also put someone in some precarious positions if they're not ready for that. And I think that kind of be like the place to start with some of the free weights versus machine work. Yeah.
Yeah. With free weights, it's a high technique component that you're having to manage lots of degrees of freedoms across multiple joints, right? So there's just a lot to coordinate, which it's kind of there's pros and cons to being a beginner and someone that's advanced within the free weight conversation, which being a beginner, for one, you're not experienced in coordinating a lift like that. However, also being a beginner, it doesn't take a lot of stimulus to get a good growth response. And also as a beginner, a lot of these compound lifts, they're just kind of like a shotgun blast of stimulus across several different muscles, right? So say, I think a barbell squat's the great example. Like, you're getting some erectors, some glutes, some quad, all involved in this movement, which, depending on how you squat, it might not be really focused in one area. For instance, if you went to like a hack squat where you somewhat remove the erectors and then the glutes are much less, and it's very, very quad focused and more braced. Now, to the advanced person, doing something like the barbell squat, if your ability to brace that component is not an issue, it can still be a very viable exercise to do. The problem becomes that as you get stronger, you might find that you need more direct stimulus for the muscle that you might see that's been not developing as you would like the rest of your body parts. So if you've been barbell squatting, you have this big old booty and thick erectors, and you're like, man, my quads just aren't growing. And when I'm squatting, like my lower back is fatiguing or my glutes are fatiguing before I'm getting the quad stimulus I need. It's like, well, then this makes maybe the way you're squatting not the best option. Or you have someone that's getting up to like a 600-pound squat. Like, I've seen some really strong guys that squat, and more, it's like managing this load and the stability of it. And then also, like, if you're a little out of track with your lift, like, man, the susceptibility to an injury, or just also losing like just the stimulus to where the target muscle you're intending, it gets higher and higher. So this is when, like, the con to the free weights for someone that's really advanced, and someone more so that's really strong, because you could be advanced and still not have that much strength development to where it still could be a good exercise. But this all comes back to, you still need to have an ability to brace. And I think whatever you're at, beginner, I think free weights have a place to start developing those skills along the way. But as someone that's advanced, I think you need the ability to brace in those lifts. And if you moved away from a squat because you lack the ability to brace, and you're moving to more brace movements, or the worst issue is that you can't brace, you got injured, and now you need to go to a more controlled pattern, that will keep spiraling down and down and down. Eventually, whatever that weak component was when you're squatting, it'll rear its head up, even in your hack squat, even in your leg press, eventually as you keep progressing up those lifts. So I think getting back to some compounds, like the ability to brace and execute these, we should always possess the skill set to do that. However, like moving to other patterns then comes down to, is there what fits your needs and your mechanics and how you're developing along the way?
Yeah, I think John, every female listener here just put barbell back squats back in their program when you talked about barbell back squats leading to a big old booty. But, and I raised my hand because that used to be me, but it's an interesting dynamic that I think, needs to be managed well. And I think there's phases for when certain body parts should kind of have a little bit more machine work versus more free weight work. And we can talk about this on like a body part specific basis, but I think managing the fatigue portion of the stimulus is huge. And I think also raising your glass ceiling is another component, because and I want to bring this up because I think that where the machines are going to come in are going to be long-term injury management. But you see an interesting trend with competitors, and it happens with most people, and it's like a zigzag, right? So you kind of start out, you're training with a lot of free weights, you're kind of learning how to move your body, you're getting into building tissue. Like you mentioned, it's not much stimulus to grow. Then you research, you watch Instagram videos and you watch all these people using machines. And yeah, that's like our social media research, right? You watch all these people training machines and you kind of start to pivot into using all these machines, but then you start to break and injuries may start to happen, or you realize functionally you're not the best at like managing load in certain positions. And so you reach out to someone, or you start to learn more yourself and realize, okay, there's a role in this free weight stimulus and being able to have internal stability, whether it be through like your ability to brace or your ability to manage load through the foot or whatever it looks like. And so you see people start to pivot back down towards like the free weight section, and then they become more advanced. They get really strong and their ability to provide a stimulus becomes really robust, and they have to pivot back towards machine work so that they don't break themselves in the long term. And so it's an interesting like zigzag you'll see people go through. And I think all of it kind of boils down to is kind of what does the program design start to look like, and how much directed stimulus has to happen for someone to progress that body part. And this would be where like you see John getting back into Smith squatting now. It's like his lower body volume needs are pretty low. So using something that provides a pretty large global stimulus fits really well into that program design, because he's not having to do 15, 16, 17, 18 sets to progress that body part, because it's a stronger piece for him. That will carry functionally over into other work. But when we start to look at maybe some of the weaker body parts, like that's going to bring in a lot of machine work, because we need to do everything we can to direct that stimulus to the target tissues to make sure we get enough stimulus to progress. And so I think directing the stimulus is a big piece of this. When we talk about like how well we're able to do that in free weights versus machines. And then I think that kind of starts to push us into the injury profile discussion and from there, because I think that is an aspect of it.
Yeah, I think within like just managing fatigue, which if you're a beginner squatting 135 pounds, like that's not going to be very fatiguing, right? So this isn't really an issue to manage. It's more so as you get more advanced, they become problematic when you're having to warm up to your, we're not even squatting 600 pounds, but what's a bodybuilder weight? Usually 400 to 500 pounds. You see a lot of guys that could squat. But just the warm ups entail from that, just loading the spine repetitively, and then you get up to finally your work sets, right? And just the global fuckery that a squat can produce, it can really tax you for the rest of your workout. So, and maybe it's not as much to that quad. So what could you do as someone that's advanced, that is a proficient squatter, but you're at a point where now you're running into not getting enough stimulus for a body part, and then your total volume for the workout is suffering. And this is when you could becoming like, how do you manage fatigue within a session? And so like for myself squatting, for one, I've gotten to where I can squat and don't need a lot of weight. But a key to this is starting to program even your brace patterns first, or even isolation work first, that are highly specific to target that intended muscle you want to bring up. So for instance, I'll do leg extensions before I do my squat. Then when I squat, I don't need as much load because my quads are already taxed a bit. And in turn, I'm not creating as much systemic fatigue, and I can just totally annihilate my quads that way. And we kind of get into the safety profile of this, is that being that there's not as much load to manage, it could be also safer for a few different reasons. So I think as you see, you advance from beginner to advanced, your exercise sequence starts to flip around a little bit. And I know we've spoken to, hey, loading a muscle lengthened right when you're fresh, you're probably going to be able to produce the most stimulus and get the most tension on a muscle. However, that's just one aspect of hypertrophy mechanism. You have to be able to consider being able to carry out this workout fully for the day, also for the week, and for multiple weeks. And for someone that's advanced, the realism of being able to squat first, have it always be quad focused, not get injured and manage your fatigue is less and less likely. So that's when we could program in something like isolation work first. So as you see, the beginner might go from a squat then to a leg press or something more braced. It kind of flips as you get more advanced. You see a lot of guys will start doing leg extensions then to their squat, or maybe it's a chest fly into their dumbbell press or whatever it may be. So that is a way to manage that fatigue side and still do those lifts if you're proficient in doing them. It still means like if you're not great at squatting and you can't brace, or you're not safe to do it, that's still not the lift you should go to when you're already more fatigued in your workout, right? But I think we're still could have something programmed to build you back up into that proficiency, which is probably a conversation for another day. But the safety component is still like absolutely a real thing to consider around all of these. Thanks everyone for tuning in to today's podcast. Are you struggling to hit your peak on show day? Feeling lost in the off season? Upgrade your coaching game with J3U University. Our program covers everything from off season to contest prep to peak week, all based from real client results. Along with our comprehensive physique curriculum, you'll also get access to our 4 rooms with our J3U team to answer any questions you have, and live Q&A sessions to further your coaching and athlete experience. We are the source of education for top IFBB pros and coaches. Join us to elevate the coaching standard at J3U University. Let's get back to today's podcast.
Yeah, and overused wear patterns too, I think, is one. There towards the end of me pursuing competing, I was using like an alternating session structure where like session 1 would be like squat first and then kind of the auxiliary work second. And then week 2 would be all the same movement, so that I'm not trying to learn new patterns, but I would start with like high rep exposure leg press work and then go into the squat pattern. And holy crap, like the amount of stimulus you could provide with that high rep exposure week before you go into the squatting, like takes, 3/4, almost, a half the load, and it's just as much stimulus, So there are ways to kind of integrate squatting first for like more advanced athletes who can squat a lot. A lot of it's just like the frequency of that dosing. If it is, you can find ways to kind of get around it. But ultimately, you got to keep an athlete safe, because that's what's going to generate the most long-term progress for someone. And if bodybuilders have a lot of weak links in the chain because we don't take care of functionally how we move very well. So it's something to make sure that you're staying on top of for yourself or for your clients. And it's huge.
Yeah. And I think you need to consider your whole week as well for picking out these compound lifts. Cause when COVID happened and I basically just had a squat rack and some dumbbells and free weights, like, oh man, was I starting to get like just trashed because I didn't have machines anymore and jumped into like all free weight movements, because a lot of free weight movements, they're great. They offer a lot of versatility and movement, like they're lots of freedoms of range, but to certain degrees they don't, right? And some might start carrying over too much workout to workout. And what I mean by this is like, say on a Monday, you have your RDL, then on Wednesday, you have your back day doing bent over rows. And then on Friday, you have your squat. Like it's so much lower back loading. So for instance, that bent over row is now having too much taxation to like axial loading in the lower back. And it's not that great of a lat trap movement if your lower back is also becoming the limiting factor in this. But to the point of like, well, free weights let you move a bit more naturally. Like, sure, where your body's not connected to them, but you know, where your hands are connected to a barbell, it doesn't allow like freedoms of movement like that much at the wrist, which kind of translates to you having to force your elbows into a certain position or move through the upper arm, like how your shoulder might move in that movement, which that could end up being like in your pressing cause issues, in your rowing causing issues, and lead to some of those repetitive use issues like Luke is talking about. So it's like, well, I could use dumbbells, and that would be the case, right? If you're not able to like have the right mechanics using a barbell, like a dumbbell could be an option. But then you have the caveat of having to manage a dumbbell, which is also going to have a lot more stability issues around it. So, you know, with all these movements, it's a pro and con list that you need to go through, and managing it across your entire week as well. And I think on the topic of like freedoms of motion, again, it's always with trying to take your body and how it moves and then match that to the best implement that you have in the gym, which is also going to focus on the body part that you need to develop. So it very well might be someone can move very proficiently in a squat or a dumbbell press, but there's other people that can't. And so we could try to look to modify that free weight lift, which is what's cool about free weight lifts, because you can have a ability to tweak them around a lot. Like I always keep going to that squat because it's a great example, but a low bar squat, you could do a high bar squat. You could do a safety squat bar. I don't think you should do a front squat. It's
No. Love you, Justin,
lots of bracing issues. It's like an upper body movement, basically. So, but anyway, we can shift a lot of this around to make it try to fit that person's ability to move. However, machines just have the issue of not being they're more fixed implements. We have some pretty adjustable ones now that are great, but again, it's still coming back to how you move and how that machine will move with you. And that's going to be one of your better choices to go with.
Yeah. And I think that hits a large percentage of the points. I think going too far in one direction versus the other, it kind of brings us back to like the middle is always the answer, right? Like trying to learn how to integrate both into program design is huge, and kind of where to take that for each person and kind of what their needs, their physiques are and their recovery capacity, abilities, and what they have available in their gym is a big aspect of this too. But I think when we look at like the debate of machine versus free weights, it's not a conversation of which one is better. It's which one fits the client currently. And then how can I progress the athlete and raise their glass ceiling, which might require a phase where functionally someone has to get better and we do a little bit more free weight work to improve that. Or maybe functionally they're good, but their glass ceiling is how they manage that load and fatigue over time. And I think if you just ask the right questions of like, how do I progress this client and raise their glass ceiling relative to free weights or machines, it's the answers kind of start to live in front of you pretty easily.
I think it's always, in some degree, we should have some amount of free weight, open chain type movements to where, because with training, it's a use it or lose it literally thing, right? If you don't using muscles in a certain way, you absolutely will lose some of the adaptations. So I've been in positions where I'm in all these very fixed machine-based patterns and injuries crop up because I have weaknesses throughout my body that were just compensating, and I didn't train them through patterns that required me to brace. So I think getting back to those, when a lot of times they get removed in prep, we get more braced. But when you're getting the off season, you have the ability to adapt at a higher level. Getting back to doing like for myself, like I'm moving back. I had a dumbbell press in last off season. Well, I'm bringing back in my dumbbell press now. So it requires me to have to really control the scapula and shoulder complex. I am moving back to a squat, but staying within my ability to execute it as well. Or even like I kept in dumbbell RDLs, like that pattern fits me really well and it's safe for me to execute it. So those still stay in kind of year round. However, most of my other work is machine based. Now moving into the off season, one thing we've talked about is like the efficacy of like drop sets, rest pause sets, when a lot of times I'll say like, hey, you should just stick to straight sets. Like these are going to be your best stimulus and management of fatigue. Because like short rest periods tend to make the next set less effective because you just can't recruit as much muscle fiber anymore. So less fiber is getting as much stimulus. And the issue around drop sets is like, try doing a drop set on your barbell back squat, right? Like 4 plates, then to 3 plates, then to 2 plates. Like you could do it, but man, like you're just, the ability to brace that, the risk of injury, like the cardiovascular side is probably going to be taxed more so than the muscular side. Yes, you might feel all around just totally messed up, right? Like in the clouds, brain fog. That doesn't necessarily mean it was better training stimulus to the muscle. So if feeling harder things doesn't always mean that it's better for what your goal is. Now, machines is where these kind of shine, because you can take out a lot of the bracing component, and isolations more so is where it even shines, where you could utilize those type of set intensifiers like a drop set or a rest pause set, because it's braced, you can get a lot of stimulus, and it's also low fatiguing. So I think that's where you have like those type of intensity techniques that you use in the off season would really shine in your machine work that you're doing. If you need to accrue more of that volume, and you also need to be time efficient as well.
Yeah. And that's kind of where like you really kind of have to just pivot into some machine work to be able to do that, especially for people that might be trying to fit volume landmarks into like a certain set schedule. Like this is where it's really opens up the use of that. Like if you're getting to the end of that all season and need those extremely high volume landmarks, but you rotate on like a set schedule kind of on the week to week, it really opens up the door to be able to hit landmarks on a per week basis. If you're able to use that. And also too, like I like to use like some loaded stretch work, and that just does so much better in like braced machines, you know, like where you can actually be in a position that's safe and you can deload it and let it go when you're done with the loaded stretch work. And I think that just kind of points to where those isolation / machine works can be useful.
What do you mean by loaded stretch work, Luke? Someone's going to ask about that.
Yeah, that's like a Dante Trudel classic, right? Like for people, yeah, like a dog crap kind of style. So I do mine a little bit different than Dante used to. So I still incorporate like contraction based work in it. So it'd be like 8 to 10 seconds in the extreme lengthened range of a body part, and then kind of initiate that contraction and then kind of go into it. And so you're doing that kind of towards the end of a session. I don't use it for everyone, but for like some higher specialized program design work where I'm trying to get in as much stimulus as possible to a specific body part, it's definitely something I'll use, especially in like people who need a lot of back development. Just because if you think about back work, like you don't get a lot of patterns that are loaded in the lengthened, and then it can take a lot of volume because it's spread out across so many different body parts. So I think it's something that's very useful in that application in particular.
I could see that maybe more so like in the, where you don't have a machine that you can change the profile on that would load lengthen, right? That you might want to extend that set in the lengthen phase a bit. Cause you could fail short, but hey, you could keep it going. Like, and like for a bench press example too, is like the triceps fail usually first before chest does. You can't lock it out. But if you're really trying to focus on chest, like extending the set a bit in the lengthen range makes sense. From a safety component, you could make it very, very slow. So,
yeah. And do it fairly safely too, if you set up the machine well to do it. Like, especially like in the pressing department, like having stoppers right where you would let it go, like a great way to do it. I've done it that way with people with some chest work before, as well.
Yeah, that's always the money part of the range. Like I see so many people, like especially back work, let that last rep go. Like you do your pull down, you pull it down your chest, and it's like, it's over. You just let it fly up, right? It's like, man, that's like you just missed like the most stimulus, the money part of that last eccentric rep. So it's like controlling that all the way lengthened. You just hold it just a little bit longer, then release it. So, but well, I don't have any more points really around this, Luke. I say we just wrap this up and give some takeaways of how you'd actually implement this. So, to what I would suggest is really which is better. There's not which is better. The better choice is going to be what's within your mechanics to do and execute, and also within your goal for your development needs. And so if a free weight fits that, if machine fits that, both can work just as well from growth. And initially starting out, especially for like someone that's beginner, it should still be a mix of both. building the skill set to execute free weight lifts, but also having machine work present as well. And then, structure wise for someone that's a beginner, you're working from compound lifts and having isolation lifts to later in the session. Now, as you get more advanced and you get stronger, you'll also need more volume, but we might see that this transition is into a little bit more volume in your free weights. It's going to look kind of like a beginner program. But I think once we get to the farther advancement of these guys, that's when you might need to get a little bit more unique in your programming exercise selection, to where you're seeing body parts not develop at rates of other ones, that you're starting to adjust your free weights or move to machines that could just preferentially bias that body part that you're looking to focus on. Or your session structure might look like isolation to a compound lift to manage fatigue and get the most stimulus out of it. But within all the conversation, you should always keep the ability to execute these free weight movement patterns. And so if you're finding yourself getting injured and moving to more brace patterns, make sure you're addressing the root issue of these injuries. And we did a great podcast with Dr. Justin Reyna on energy management and issues that are cropping up within bodybuilders. So please check out that episode if you haven't listened to that one yet. And any questions down below, leave it for us. And maybe we just start the debate. Tell us down below, which is better for quad mass, squats or hack squats? Let it rip. Well, thank you guys. We'll talk to you next time.